A friend online by the name of Jonathan Ponce asked me what my top five favorite musicians are. And I told him I would make a video about that. And when I started to think about it, I realized it was going to be impossible for me to narrow it down to five. And so I have 25 here that I'm going to list, and I'm going to share 1 to 4 records by each one. I'm not going to get into detail about each of the recordings. I'm just going to talk about each artist and why I like them. I'll try to make this pretty quick, or as quickly as I can. But I'm a little bit of a different kind of musician, listener, fan, and in a way that seems to be different than a lot of people. What I grew up listening to isn't necessarily my favorite stuff now. I've kind of been on this journey exploring lots of different kinds of music and getting into different artists over the years and learning from them. And so I've kind of been all over the place, and I really love a lot of different kinds of music. And there's tons of other musicians that I'm not listing here that I have a tremendous amount of admiration for and respect, and sometimes get inspiration from them. People like Duke Ellington or Brad Mehldau. But these are the 25 that I put together right before filming. So I just grabbed the albums that I have listened to a lot. Some of these not so much in recent times. But so the fact that I was able to put it together right away just kind of told me it was pretty clear in my head that these are my top ones. And yeah, so I like these musicians for different reasons, which I guess I'm going to go ahead and talk about. It's going to be pretty obvious that I like musicians for different reasons. It's not like a theme here where it's like because they have really good technique or because they're good composers or because of this, that, or the other thing. And I didn't put these in any particular order. There is no number one favorite musician for me. And I also intentionally put them in a random order as far as styles and eras and genres and all that kind of stuff. And I did focus on single artists, but there's a couple where they're in the context of a band, very often as a leader. But yeah, so I'll just go ahead and dive right in, and I hope this is enjoyable for those that are watching. So Charlie Parker, his collection that I have here on Savoy Jazz, it's just a really nice collection of his discography when he was an artist for Savoy. It's got a lot of his well-known tracks. And so, yeah, I said I wasn't going to talk about the recordings, but yeah, so Charlie Parker, Savoy, and then Charlie Parker, Bird, and Diz. And Charlie Parker, I mean, some referred to him as the Albert Einstein of music, just a genius of music, and he really was groundbreaking and innovative for the time and influenced pretty much all jazz musicians after him. And I've studied and played a lot of his music, and I've listened to him a ton. And when I had a regular gig many years ago, this would have been like 13 years ago, I had a regular jazz gig, and me and the bass player, we did a whole month featuring Charlie Parker music. We focused just on Charlie Parker. All right, and then Wes Montgomery, incredible jazz guitar is my favorite album by him. This one with Jimmy Smith and Boss guitar. Wes, I mean, a lot of people focus on the fact that he used his thumb and he did the octave thing. But for me, I mean, that stuff is cool. But for me, it's more about his phrasing, his sound, his swing feel. Those are kind of the big ones that stick out to me. And such an identifiable way of playing. And I've just been so inspired by him and have learned a lot by listening to him. Wayne Shorter, one of my favorite jazz composers, so identifiable, right? Just a really deep musician that I consider, a true artist. He went on to, after the acoustic jazz stuff, go into fusion stuff and kept evolving as an artist. So I always respect that. But his record, Adam's Apple, etc., and Speak No Evil, I would probably consider this, from my perspective, his masterpiece. Let's change it up. Mozart. And I've talked about this before, but this comes from a box set that I actually grew up with, so I have some attachment to this. But it is a nice collection of variegated works. Mozart, just brilliant, right? I think even he thought when he was alive that he was brilliant. And then Allan Holdsworth, Wardenclyffe Tower, when he was in the Tony Williams, or just this one recording, when he was in Tony Williams' band, All Night Wrong. This is probably my favorite Allan Holdsworth recording, and 16 Men of Tain. And Holdsworth, just a genius on the guitar, genius of music. Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, Eddie Van Halen, they all said if they could only choose one guitar player as being the greatest of all time, they would choose Allan Holdsworth. Holdsworth he was just advanced in every way, right? And he really had a nice combination of using rock kind of sounds and rock grooves with very modern, almost kind of modern classical type harmony, but it was his own unique harmonic sensibilities. And then the linear stuff was just so modern jazz-like and Coltrane influenced. And he had a lot of technique, but that's never really something I focus on in a musician. I think good technique is just if the musician is able to clearly express their ideas through their instrument. It's not necessarily being able to play fast. All right, I'll jump over to this. So Wayne Krantz, I've already made a video recently about him in my Berklee College Music #1 takeaway. This is my favorite album by him. I studied with him for many years, and so this is how the musicians are kind of different for me. Wayne was just so influential for me, and I learned so much from him, and and that album and then this book that he included me in have just been really huge for me. I haven't listened to him or been really influenced by him for some years now, but he was huge for me in my evolution. All right. Yeah, John Coltrane. This one, which is the first studio recording of, I guess I'm going to talk about the albums a little bit, first studio recording of the classic quartet that he put together with McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones on drums. And then I consider this his masterpiece. Many people do. And then his album, Giant Steps. Those are my top 3 favorite by Coltrane. Coltrane, he kind of set a new standard for what it meant to be a dedicated musician. And he really pushed himself constantly, which has been a huge source of inspiration for me. I've never practiced for 24 hours straight or 15 hours straight or even 12 hours straight. I made a video recently talking about how the most I've ever done is 10 hours, and I did that once. But he's just been a huge inspiration for me. And part of the thing with Coltrane is just that whole spiritual thing. He talked about at one point in his development, he started to become more interested in the life side of music, more of how does music relate to him as a human being and how he lives in the world and how that world is influencing him, that kind of thing. But, he had tremendous technique and a great sound, individualistic sound. He developed his own vocabulary, his own kind of tunes, his own concepts. All that stuff is true too, But yeah, so one of the all-time greats, right? All right, and some of these are pretty new for me as far as having a huge influence on me. So Chick Corea. I've talked about this before, but Chick Corea, I feel like I can relate to him in the sense that he studied classical music. He played acoustic, straight-ahead jazz. He was interested in Latin music, and then also he did the electric kind of envelope pushing stuff. So this record, Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, and I think this is one of his masterpieces. Return to Forever's Romantic Warrior, and then Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy. Those are my 3 favorite Chick Corea albums. But just, yeah, brilliant musician, right? All right, and then this goes back to when I was a teenager. He was a huge inspiration for me, and I still have a tremendous amount of respect for him. But I don't really listen to him anymore, but he was just so important to me in my development. I had to include him. Steve Vai. Fire Garden. I love that record, and Passion and Warfare. I love how individualistic he is, how much of an artist he is, and, another very committed musician, right? He talked about practicing 10 hours a day regularly, and, there's just the whole thing. I mean, there's just so much to admire about him, right? And then Danny Elfman. So this actually goes back to my earliest memories of hearing music. That's why part of the reason I included him. But yeah, Danny Elfman's film score for the movie Batman with Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton. The music that was in the film, I just have so much attachment to, because it really is my earliest memories of hearing music. I mean, this is before I was even 10. What would I have been, like 8 years old when that movie came out? So yeah, and then when he started composing for orchestra, for symphonies and stuff, this album, Serenade of Schizophrenia, I love this album very much. And yeah, I just love the fact that Danny Elfman, I kind of relate to him in a way sort of where, he's just interested in different kinds of music that he gets involved with and develops himself in. He was in a theater group, and then he would put together his group Oingo Boingo, and then he started doing film scoring, and then he started doing the classical stuff. I mean, the film scoring was influenced by classical music for sure, but then he got really into composing for orchestras, right? So, that kind of musician, I really admire that. And all right, and then I've been going through this Joe Henderson phase, and I just really like these 4 records by him. These are my favorite albums by Joe Henderson. Power to the People, and In and Out, Page One, and Mode for Joe. And each of these records are pretty different, even though they were all in the 60s. His sound is slightly different, and the contexts are a little different, and so really like those 4 records a lot. I went through a pretty heavy Bill Evans phase recently, and these 2 records just mean so much to me. I shared a transcription I did from this record, Autumn Leaves. I put a video of me playing along with his solo on this that I figured out, and it's one of my favorite jazz solos of all time. Really, really great. And Explorations. These are the only 2 studio recordings with his trio with Paul Motian and Scott LaFaro. I think that was his best group, and I absolutely love these 2 recordings. And Bill, he just had such a deep concept of music, and his sound was so personal, and I love his groove, his swing feel, his articulation, his harmonic sensibilities, on and on. I really like his tunes. His tune Time Remembered is one of my absolute favorite jazz standards. I'm going to make a video actually about my favorite jazz standards, and that'll be in there. And then Bill Frisell, this record. I don't think this has a title. I can't find it anyways. It's with Elvin Jones and Dave Holland on bass. And this was huge for me in my mid-20s. Because Bill had all the sophistication of a jazz musician. I mean, he is a jazz musician, but he does stuff with it that's so personal and unique and special that it's really inspirational. Because he's not a flashy guitar player in any kind of obvious surface level kind of sense. He's just got a beautiful approach and sound and melodic sensibilities and a deep understanding of harmony and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, been a huge inspiration for me. All right, yeah. So I had to include Antonio Carlos Jobim, one of my all-time favorite musicians, composers, particularly as a composer. At one time, I knew I could play 30 of his tunes. I could probably play 10 of them off the top of my head right now. But sometimes I go through heavy Antonio Carlos Jobim phases. And yeah, those records are my favorite by him. And growing up, along with Steve Vai, Joe Satriani was a really big deal for me. And these records, and Flying in a Blue Dream. I haven't replaced this one on CD. This is just what I had growing up. But Flying in a Blue Dream is one of my favorite recordings by him. And I've seen Joe a handful of times live. I've seen Steve Vai a handful of times live too. I guess I could have talked about some of these musicians that I've seen live, but yeah. And then, so Pat Metheny, his record, I think this is called Imaginary Day. And then his first record, Bright Side's Life. Beautiful, beautiful musician. He's been a huge source of inspiration. Yeah, really great musician, right? And this is where things kind of change up a little bit. Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow. I've listened to this record over and over and over. Such a great recording. And Stevie Ray Vaughan. He was huge for me as a teenager, and I still dig his playing, and, you know, so powerful, unique, very special musician. Franz Schubert, Death and the Maiden. This is a string quartet recording. And then this recording by the Radio Symphony Orchestra. Schubert, yeah, you know, I can just listen to him any day pretty much. Such depth, such beauty. And one of the things I really like about Schubert is his music was really made kind of for music's sake. It wasn't so much like he was inspired by, you know, what was going on politically, for instance, at the time. He was really expressing music in kind of a pure way, which I really admire that. And then this is very recent, I mean, like in the last few years. But I would just include Joe Zawinul in this just because Weather Report's my favorite fusion band, and these two records I keep coming back to even to this day. So Heavy Weather, I think, is just brilliant, amazing, and Black Market. Those two, yeah. And then Sonny Rollins, Sound of Sonny, Saxophone Colossus. I've worn this out, listened to it so much. He's another committed musician like Coltrane and many of these others, and just really love his playing and how dedicated he was as a musician. He no longer plays. He's in his 90s now, but what a musician. And then Miles, you know, the thing about Miles that I just love so much is just the fact that he kept evolving as a musician and as an artist. I really consider Miles a true artist. You know, a true artist is, I think, one that keeps innovating, keeps creating new contexts, and keeps pushing themselves and pushing the boundaries of what's accepted and all that kind of stuff. He didn't play it safe, you know, and I love that. So, of course, Kind of Blue. And then I actually like, this is my favorite Miles record, Bitches Brew. I know some people don't like it, but I love that record. And then Kurt Rosenwinkel, Modern Jazz Guy. This record, Enemies of Energy, I just love this record so much. And then, of course, I had to have Bach. You know, just magnificent, incredible musician he was, right? Could talk about Bach for a long time, but I'll keep it brief here and just say that much. And then Beethoven. And I didn't mean to actually even plan this, but it turns out that I'm ending on this. If someone said to me, who I consider the greatest musician of all time, I would pick Beethoven, just because of what he was able to accomplish when he was able to hear, but particularly when he couldn't hear, right? I mean, the masterpieces he wrote while he was deaf. And Moonlight Sonata is a piece I know how to play on guitar. It's one of my all-time favorite pieces of music, and I love a lot of his music. But just so inspiring. The fact that he kept at it even when he lost his hearing. So, anyways, I'll end it there because this video has already gone way too long. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Jonathan Pons for asking me about my favorite musicians. All right. Thanks for watching.